Well, today again, my name is Shannon Krogan. I'm the Director of Transfer Admission here at Chapman. I've been working with our transfer students for several years. I'm a former transfer student myself. I'm from Orange County, grew up in Costa Mesa and attended Orange Coast College and a little bit of Golden West College before moving on. I actually went to Chapman for 2 years and finished there as a senior. I do love working with the transfer students. The common application is definitely can sometimes be a challenge for students. And so we did create a couple of slides to kind of go over the Common App kind of 101 process when applying to private colleges and universities. It's a little challenging to do a Common App presentation because sometimes each university does it a little differently, but I'm going to try and do as best as I can and insert some Chapman examples because I know that school the best, obviously. And then I'll take some questions at the end if any of you have any questions or concerns about anything that we go over. The Common Application itself is used by quite a lot of colleges. Some public schools actually use it, but it's predominantly utilized by a lot of colleges across the country that are considered private institutions. It's a uniformed application that you can submit to multiple institutions. For us in California, it kind of feels sometimes like the UC or the Cal State app. The Common Application is a centralized application, and you can assign multiple colleges to it that you want to send it to. So it's used both public and private, in-state and out-of-state. I think one of the things that it's always good to kind of ask your individual colleges is if they're an exclusive user of the Common Application. What that generally means is the only application that school uses would be the Common Application itself. And every school is a little different. This is where this presentation gets a little challenging. Chapman, for example, is what we call an exclusive user of the Common Application. We only allow students to apply to us through the Common Application itself. We don't have a separate Chapman application that you can just do on the side. So there is a first-year version and a transfer version of the Common Application that's out there. Our students that are applying to us from high school are going to use the first-year version, and our transfers that have started a college record after their high school graduation date are going to utilize the transfer version of the Common Application. I work very closely with another great private school somewhat in the local area, Loyola Marymount University. It's located in Los Angeles, not too far away from us here in Orange County. And they utilize both the Common App for transfers, but they also have their own LMU application. And so that's just another good example of how a private school does things a little differently. So the purpose or kind of reasoning behind that over at LMU is if you know you just want to apply to LMU, you can just do the Loyola Marymount University application. If you are looking at multiple institutions in addition to LMU, it might be easier for you to do the Common Application because, again, LMU is going to pick that up and many other private colleges will pick that up as well too. So I think that's a good kind of point to make and something you should be looking for when you're doing your research on applying to your private colleges and universities. What kind of application do they utilize? Is it just the Common App, or do you have an option to do another one? I think another good question to bring out is who is a transfer student when you're applying to certain colleges? And I think, again, you might get different answers at different institutions, so bear with me. I'll use another Chapman example. At Chapman, once your high school record ends and you start a college record, whether you've got completed college courses or not, even if you're just in progress with them, you are considered a transfer applicant. Many of your colleges, especially your private schools, won't necessarily have a minimum unit count in order to apply to private schools as a transfer student. Now, that's not a blanket statement. There are some private colleges out there that'll have a minimum unit count that you need to hit to apply as a transfer. But a lot of us, once you finish that high school record and you start your college record, you'd be doing the transfer version of the Common Application and applying as a transfer student. So I think that's always a good question to ask your colleges, especially if you're in that gray area and you're not sure, should I apply as a first year or should I apply as a transfer student? I think the main thing to kind of get across in this presentation, which is also probably the most frustrating point, is that colleges, especially your private universities, operate on all different timelines, deadlines, and again, different types of applications that we utilize. So I think one of the best and kind of old school ideas is if you've got a couple of different private colleges, whether they're in state or out of state that you're looking at, you want to make sure that you kind of start an Excel grid or a Word doc or a Google Doc somewhere and keep track of your individual private colleges, deadlines, timelines, the type of application they use, and making sure you're doing the right student type, whether you're a first year or you're applying as a transfer student. I'm going to utilize Chapman's deadlines just to give you an example. So we have one application deadline for transfers in the fall. It's always February the 15th. And then we have one application deadline for spring mid-year transfers, which is October the 15th. So generally, private colleges tend to get a little less application volume from transfers than our public school counterparts do for the most part. And so therefore, it's not uncommon that a lot of your private colleges will have later application deadlines after the UCs and the Cal States, those deadlines have passed. So it's not uncommon that you might get a deadline in December, January, February, or sometimes even March for a private school. So just make sure that, again, even though the common application itself is pretty universal, you're going to have to still pay attention to when you have to submit your Common App for your individual private colleges, because we all operate off of different timelines and deadlines that you have to adhere to. We do offer a fee waiver through the Common Application. We get this question quite a bit at Chapman. Common App does have scenarios embedded in one of their sections when you do the Common Application. And if you, at least at Chapman, if you any of those scenarios apply to you and you can check one or all that'll apply, we automatically grant you a fee waiver, an application fee waiver. Our application fee at Chapman is $70. That can differ amongst your different colleges. But again, we utilize the fee waiver within the Common App. If students hit any of those scenarios that they kind of adhere to or apply into, then we will grant them an application fee, and you can submit the common application without submitting an application fee. So something to kind of be mindful of as well too. There's a couple of different sections within the common application itself. So generally they're going to have a personal information section, which is about 8 different kind of categories that you fill out. This is also where that Common App fee waiver area kind of rests in within the common application. There's going to be 11 sections on what they call academic history. This is generally where you're putting in where you went to school and your graduation dates and what classes you're taking, all that kind of good stuff. There's a supporting information section, which has kind of 4 individual subsections within it. And then where things get a little different is usually in what we call the program materials section. So the common application itself is going to look the same for any college that utilizes the common application. It is up to the individual universities and colleges if they are also going to have a program materials section. So when you start a common application account, you can go in and list all of the colleges that you plan to apply to through the Common App. And Common App will obviously let you know if there's the Common App in addition to the program materials section, which is embedded in the Common App for each individual college that has one, if that makes sense. So again, Common App itself is the same content for every school out there. And then when you hit Chapman or you hit LMU or you hit Pepperdine or you hit USC, that's when you're going to get into the individual colleges programs materials section. And that's where you're going to see individual questions specific to that college or university, so that when you submit the Common App, the program materials section goes along with it to that particular school. So I cannot see your responses to the program materials section at USC. I can only see them when you submit your Common App for the Chapman program materials section. And why there's kind of 2 different areas, the main Common App and the program materials that so many of us utilize, is that the common application by itself is pretty generic. For those of you that might have already done one or started one or maybe did one when you were in high school, it's pretty generic. There's not a lot of depth of information we can get out of just the common application itself. So I usually use the common application for more of that kind of basic biographic, demographic information, name, age, birth date, where you live, where you went to school, all that kind of good stuff. That's important stuff we need to know. The program materials section for each individual college that has one is meant to kind of drill down a little bit on your specific interest and fit with that particular college. So this allows us to dig a little deeper into you as a student, who you are, what you're looking for out of your college experience, and can we kind of meet those demands at Chapman or at Redlands or at USC or at Santa Clara. And that's why a lot of the colleges will have a couple of extra questions specific to their own school in the program materials section. So for example, Chapman, this is where you're going to list what you want to major in at Chapman, which might be different than what you're going to major in at another school, because maybe we call it something different. We also ask you to clarify why you want to major in that particular field. And we allow transfers to list up to 2 major choices on their application. We also want to know if you've done any sort of visiting or engagement with us virtually. So did you attend a virtual transfer session? Have you come to a campus visit? Do you know anyone that goes to Chapman? Those types of things. And then we have an essay. It's pretty generic in a good way, where it just basically asks the transfer to give us a little narrative of your college path so far, how that transition has been coming out of high school into your college record so far, lessons learned along the way, highs and lows. This is where students can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how their transfer journey has been so far, any hiccups, any good things they want to write a little bit about. If there's been gaps in enrollment, times students have taken a break in going to school and then coming back into college, you can write a little bit about that as well too. And then we generally will do what we call kind of a Chapman specific university type of question. This slide is actually one that we used last year. So this current one, it's a little bit different, but I pulled our kind of scenario question. It's a one question and you pick whether you want to answer section A or section B on it, just so you guys can see just a little bit of an example. And again, what we're trying to do is to establish a good, what we call fit and a good match. Is, what you want to do in college and how your journey's been so far and what you're looking for in a school. Do we feel we can, kind of meet up with those demands of you from that? We want to make sure that you're telling us a little bit about you and what you're looking for, but that you've also done a little research on us. So for example, if you're looking for a school with an architecture program on the East Coast, we're probably not the best fit for you at Chapman. We don't have an architecture major and we're not on the East Coast. So these program materials section and these questions within it, and again, this is just a sample of what we did last year at Chapman, are meant to force you guys in a good way to do a little bit of research on Chapman or on Redlands or on Santa Clara or on Pepperdine or Oxy to make sure that we're a good match for you, but you're a good match for us. It's not just about you kind of selling yourself to us in a way. We're trying to do the same thing because, again, we want to make sure we're admitting students that have somewhat of an idea of what they're walking into and they think the school is going to be a good match for them, and that we think you're going to hit the ground running and doing well and kind of sail through and finish there and graduate and have a really good experience. And so those program materials section really kind of helps us dive into that a little bit more outside of just kind of those basic, name, age, birth date questions. This does kind of force you to think a little bit in a good way. We look at your writing skills. We look at how you're putting an essay together. But most importantly, we're just trying to get to know you a little bit better, outside of just your recommendation letters and outside of your transcripts that you're submitting, and wanting to make sure that you're a good fit for us, but we're a good fit for you as well, too. That's a really, really big deal. I have a little kind of note in here that there are some optional questions within the Common App and some mandatory questions. So that always gets people, sometimes they're kind of like, I can't hit submit on my Common App. What's going on? I generally will tell a student, go back and look. You got to make sure that all of the mandatory questions on the Common App have an answer that you've submitted, and then you can submit your Common App. So that's one of my first things I ask students when they email us and they go, I'm done with my Common App, but it won't let me submit. They'll have an asterisk, and it's usually in red within the Common App on those fields or those questions that are going to require some sort of response from you. So just kind of keep that in mind a little bit as well too. I've got on here a little bit of what we like to talk about. Oop, let that go there. Sorry about that. If we can get that back, there we go. On kind of what we call additional information or documents that can come in addition to the Common Application. Again, every college is a little different on this, so bear with me, but I'm going to go through some of these and use Chapman as a little bit of an example. So what's unique a little bit with your private universities is a lot of them may require an official college transcript when you apply for admission. So typically, for example, at Chapman, we require official college transcripts for any work that has been completed so far in college. That'll show us any in-progress work that you're in and any completed work that you've done leading up to that point. Obviously, if a student gets admitted and they're in-progress work, they have to send another updated transcript when they finish out their semester, those types of things. Most of your private colleges are going to probably require you to do a recommendation letter. Now, in terms of volume, that can differ per college. Chapman only requires one. We'll read up to two. I typically say one is fine. And there's a recommender section within the Common Application itself. Typically, what most universities do with that is that you register a recommender in that section of the Common App. You put the recommender's name and contact information and email address. And then Common App will email your recommender a link, and that's where your recommender can upload their letter back into your Common Application file. So you may not see your recommendation letter, but your recommender has access to put it back in your Common Application file. Recommendation letters, in terms of where they come from, can differ per college. At Chapman, we tell transfers it can come from anyone but a relative. So it can come in from someone from school. It can come from someone that's a family friend. We get a lot of recommendation letters from managers, supervisors at work. That's very common. Could also be a colleague that you work with, could be a mentor, an advisor, a coach. We do allow transfers to go back to their high school and get a letter of recommendation from there. Recommendation letters have been a challenge, obviously, since kind of going into COVID and coming out of COVID, because not everybody really knows all of their professors like they used to anymore, and that's become a challenge. So I think you'll find that most universities are going to have a level of flexibility as to who your recommendation letter comes in from, if that helps a little bit. It doesn't have to necessarily always come in from a college academic source. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But you do want to check with your individual colleges on, one, do they require a recommendation letter? And two, how many? And they might have a minimum and a max that they give you. And then there's some what we call additional application materials that I like to talk about, because we do some of this at Chapman, some of this we don't, but I kind of threw everything in here just in case some of you may run across these scenarios as you're looking at different private colleges. Creative supplement is usually an addendum to an application. So for example, at Chapman, our talent-based majors, anything in art, dance, theater, music, or film, requires the Common Application. Remember, within that are our Chapman specific questions and a creative supplement. And the creative supplement for us is kind of like your portfolio for your talent-based majors. Most majors don't have a creative supplement, but some of them do. And they're very specific on content as to what we're requiring within the creative supplement. So it's not an open-ended, send us what you got, we'll read everything you turn in. It's very structured and sequenced out per major as to what goes into the actual creative supplement that you're submitting. And that is something that, again, can be required for some of the arts related majors you might be looking at some of your different private colleges and universities. It's not always called a creative supplement. It could be an addendum to the application or a portfolio. At Chapman, we call it the creative supplement. Then we have our fun test scores. So nowadays, I would think that most universities for our transfers probably are not requiring an SAT or an ACT score. Again, always a good question to ask or do research on. At Chapman, we don't require SAT or ACT score reporting for anybody that's applying as a transfer student, regardless of the units you have coming in. Whether you took the SAT or ACT in high school, you can report those if you want to, but it's not part of our application review process for a transfer student. But that's a question you might want to do a little research on, depending on the private college or university you're looking at. Because remember, private colleges sometimes don't have a minimum unit count in order to apply into them. So sometimes if you're a younger transfer, you might have to submit some high school information, maybe a test score, high school transcript, those types of things. One of the areas that I think get overlooked a lot by transfer students are AP and IB exam scores. So if you were in high school and you took any advanced placement or international baccalaureate exams, you do want to make sure that you are sending those scores to your respective colleges that you're applying into, because they most certainly could potentially give you some college credit at that four-year university that you want to transfer into. Typically, what I tell transfers applying into Chapman, there's an optional section within the Common App where you can report any kind of test score. And then I typically tell them to self-report there. And then if admitted, and they're going to Chapman, to then order their official AP or IB scores. It generally costs a little bit of money to order AP and IB exam scores. So I typically tell the students that are applying to transfer to Chapman to self-report. And then if it looks like we're going to admit and you're going to come to Chapman, then you can pay for your scores to just go to one school. Sometimes we'll get questions on CLEP examination scores. We have a very helpful grid for both AP, IB, and CLEP exams on our website, where students can look up the actual exam and the minimum score they need to take or receive in order to gain college credit for a CLEP exam or an AP or an IB exam that you might have took. I think sometimes when you leave high school, I probably was the same way, you forget about some of that stuff. And then usually if I advise students coming into transfer into Chapman, I always try to ask them, hey, did you do any AP or IB work when you were in high school? Because that sneaks up on you sometimes, and that can give you some college credit, which we would love to do. The question we always get is, do I have to submit my high school transcripts when I apply as a transfer? And again, you're gonna get a different, probably answer regardless, depending on the school you're looking at. Usually I think the rule of thumb is if you are under 60 units at the college level, when you hit submit on your application, you're going to have to submit a high school transcript. And that's the case at Chapman. So you don't count your units in progress. You're just looking at your units completed. If you're less than 60 units completed at the college level, when you hit submit on your application, you are going to need to submit a high school transcript. Now, how we use it at Chapman is not using it to make an admission decision. We're actually just using it to prove that you graduated from high school. Due to the federal funding we receive for financial aid through the federal government, we're required to either show proof of high school graduation for all of our students or 60 or more college units at the time they hit submit on the application. So rest assured, if we're asking for your high school transcript, we're not using it in the admission decision. We're just using it as official proof that you've graduated from high school. This can also be submitted through a GED exam or a state proficiency exam as well too. So we always get that question on, oh gosh, I have to turn in my high school transcript. What are you using it for? And again, most of the time we're just using it to verify your official high school graduation date. Again, we don't have a minimum unit count to transfer as a transfer student to Chapman. And so sometimes we will get younger transfer students that are just in their first or maybe second half of their community college career. Another area that gets overlooked is any dual college enrollment you did while you were in high school. And this has been happening a lot the last couple of years, especially during COVID. Again, it's like those AP and IB exam scores. Don't forget to go back in your head and remember what you did in high school. Maybe when you were in high school, you took a dual college enrollment class through Irvine Valley College or Saddleback, and it got you a college class. Well, that needs to come to us on an official college transcript. we can't utilize the high school transcript for that. So in order for us to give you college credit for any dual enrollment that you work, you've got to turn in those individual transcripts as well too. And then there's a couple of what we call offline common application forms that I would say most colleges don't require when you initially apply, but may ask you for them once your application is moving in the review process. So the two most common forms are the college officials report and then also what we call the midterm report form. So again, I'm going to give you a Chapman example. I would say for 99% of our applicants, we don't ask for the college officials report form. This is typically only asked of applicants if there's been some sort of disciplinary issue at a school that we want to kind of dig a little deeper on. The college officials report form usually has to be filled out by the dean of students office and the registrar's office at your current college before you send that over. So very rarely will we ask for that, but sometimes we do, but it's after the review process has already started. It's not at the onset of applying for admission for the first time. One of the forms we ask for quite a bit is the midterm report form. As most of you will know, you're going to be in progress sometimes with classes when you're applying into your colleges. Well, sometimes we want to see how those grades are going halfway through the semester. And we will sometimes use those midterm grades to kind of make an admission decision so we don't have to wait for the final grades to come out. So typically how we do that at Chapman is, again, you don't submit this when you apply. This is something that if we ask you for it, we send you an email and we send you the form to use in the email and where to send the form back to. So the college officials report and the midterm report form generally are not usually asked of you at the onset of doing the Common App, but can happen a little later on in the actual review process. So just be mindful of those. Those are probably the two most common kind of what we call offline Common App forms that sometimes you'll get communication about once your application starts moving in that review process. A couple of tips and tricks that I like to kind of put down for the Common Application. Really, I think one of your best resources is your individual college's website. Usually they'll have a steps to applying for admission for a high school applicant and a separate one for transfers. That's usually where you can find a lot of the deadline information and then a lot of information on these individual documents that we're talking about. Do I need to send my high school transcript? Is that even something I need to worry about at Redlands? Does USC require me to report any test scores of any kind? So going to that college website or that web page for applying as a transfer, I think is going to be a really, really helpful area for you to go into. And then for Chapman, we've got that on our webpage, and then we have a link right into the Common Application right from there, which is great. So that's good to know. One big thing that is really helpful to know is that you can edit the Common Application all the way until you hit submit on it. So the Common App is not something you have to sit down and do in one sitting and get it all done. You can stop it, save it, and go back and finish your work on it and make adjustments before you hit submit. Once you hit submit, you can't go back and do any edits. So then if you've done something wrong or something you want to update, you typically are going to have to contact your individual colleges and go, oops, I entered the wrong course, or I put the wrong date for that, all that kind of good stuff. So just remember to take your time with the Common App. You don't have to get it done in one sitting or anything like that. One of my big things I always tell students is give your colleges time to process the Common App once it's submitted. I know it feels like everything is kind of instantaneous. Okay, I hit submit, it's all done. You should see it on your end. There's still a lot of human work that goes on the back end of things once a Common Application gets submitted, especially if you're doing it over a weekend or a holiday break where we're not pulling applications down at that time. So I typically tell my transfers, once you hit submit on the Common App, give us a couple of business days to get in there and pull it into our system. And then we typically will send an email out to the student letting them know, okay, we got your Common App. This is where you can start your, what we call your applicant portal, where you can track the rest of your supporting documents that are coming in and watching your application kind of move in the review process too. go back and review your work before you hit submit. I should probably move this bullet point up a little bit. This is really, really important. I cannot tell you how many times people misspell their name or get their birth date wrong. And you would think that would not be a big deal, but it is, because it can sometimes create a separate record for a different student, so that, for example, your transcripts coming in are going under one birth date and your application coming in is going under the other birth date. So you look like two different people. So just take some time to work on your Common Application. Don't rush through it. Make sure you're checking your grammar and your spelling, and but also too that you got your birth date right and your name right and all that kind of fun stuff. That happens every year. Sometimes it'll just pop out two records on the same student because there was a misspelling of a name or a birth date got wrong. For us, I usually tell students, again, you don't need to wait to submit your Common App for your transcripts or your letter of rec. So Common App does have a way you can order transcripts through them. My tip and trick is just to order your transcript through your individual college and have your college send it directly to your schools you're applying into, but don't tell anyone at Common App I said that. I think the Common App process takes a little bit longer when you place that order request through Common App. I typically find that students are they can be a little faster in getting us the transcripts if they go directly to their individual colleges, order their transcripts, and have them just be sent to us directly. And again, the letter of rec, all you have to do is register your recommender. Your recommender has time to upload their letter. Common App is just going to make sure that you registered somebody in that recommender section, and then they'll allow you to submit the Common App without your letter of recommendation. It'll eventually catch up to it. I think a big thing to realize too is Common App is an East Coast organization and it's on an East Coast time frame. So keep in mind, if you're submitting at the umpteenth hour on the actual deadline and you hit submit, you think you're all good to go, and all of a sudden that timestamp is 3 hours ahead of us than what we are out here in California, and you're thinking, my gosh, I'm going to be considered a late applicant. Keep that in mind. I can't say that all schools are going to be flexible with that because I don't know. I think a good rule of thumb is don't wait till the application deadline to hit submit on anything anyways, because just to give yourself a little bit of a buffer. But just keep in mind, watch the timestamp of when you're submitting your Common App, because it's going to register kind of on that East Coast time zone time frame. So be mindful of that as well too. Common App has a couple of resources for some help in regards to applying as a transfer student. Again, I really think your best resource is your individual college on their website or their web page. For example, I think that's where you're going to find a lot of the answers to your individual questions in regards to, do I just use the Common App? Is there another application option? Timelines, deadlines, and those supporting documents that are required of me to apply as a transfer student and move my actual application file forward in the review process. I'm going to go ahead and just leave this on here for just a minute. We have a general inbox at Chapman called transfers@chapman.edu. If you have any transfer related questions in general, feel free to send us those to that inbox. You can also call us as well.